Hello, I'm Kevin Reed, President of the Vancouver Island Real Estate Board. We are the Association of Professional Realtors here on Vancouver Island. It's our distinct pleasure to introduce the Changing Our Ways panel of planners and developers session. We're delighted to sponsor this event and to support the Vancouver Island economy. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Carrie Slavens. I'm the Director of Engagement at the South Island Prosperity Partnership, and I'm here today to introduce you to the panel Changing Our Ways, which is a panel of planners and developers. This is actually my 7th Vancouver Island Economic Summit, and I'm very pleased to be here. While we'll miss seeing everybody in person, we've got a great group here today on Zoom, and we're all getting very comfortable with Zoom, right? So I would like to introduce you to our panel today. First off, we have Kathy Witcher. Kathy is the Executive Director of the Urban Development Institute Capital Region. Next, we have Miko Batanzo. Miko is a Senior Planner, Urban Design, Sustainable Planning and Community Development, City of Victoria. And lastly, we have Luke Maury, and Luke is the Principal and Development Leader at Arise Developments. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So today, we're actually going to move into talking about development. And you know, as cities grow and change, development plays a big part in shaping our landscape. And municipalities play a big role in representing the needs of the communities. The question we have today is, how do we improve the development process for the betterment of the communities we want, from rezoning to official community plans? What we're going to try and come up with today amongst all of us is an easy, logical, and positive set of solutions that we can then pass on from our recording session and hopefully to the ears of those who need to hear it. So I'm going to start with some questions on, you know, development and construction. We all know they play such a vital role in our island. The media is full of them. Still, despite the critical role developers play, many people argue the system of actually getting developments built doesn't work as well as it could. Before we drill down into solutions, Kathy and Luke, what are your perspectives on this? Is it working? Could it be better?
Go ahead, Luke. Take it away.
Is it working? You know, not really. You know, housing is getting built, but to some degree, the whole system is, well, it is very old. It's you know, a few decades old, the process that we undertake to get through approvals to get housing built. The main thing is the system of consultation and approvals was never designed to contemplate a group, an audience group, a user group that is underrepresented, and that's the future residents. The whole system is designed to contemplate the needs of the current residents. And so as our challenges in our cities related to affordability, climate change, transportation, coordination between different municipalities grow in their complexity, we're still dealing with an old system that was never designed to really handle all these interrelationships of kind of a modern city. So the challenge before us is, how do we get housing built efficiently and quickly and affordably, but with jurisdictions adding layers upon layers and upon layers of additional requirements. So it seems like our needs and the ask are moving in opposite directions.
And of course, being centered in the capital region of British Columbia, I mean, we're dealing with 13 municipalities. A lot of people outside of our capital region may not realize that we actually have so many municipalities in a very small area. Kathy, how about you? Is the process working? What's your thoughts?
I completely agree with Luke. You know, it's looking backwards instead of forwards. We have a little bit of currently a lack of political will as well. It kind of seems that, you know, developers are bringing the housing applications forward, but it's just they're just not getting traction on building the numbers that should be built right now anyways. And you know, I think that it just gets caught up in the system of the process, that gets bogged down a little bit. And I'm sure we'll be talking about solutions. So I'll leave it. I'll leave my solutions for our later conversation.
Okay, that's great. And I want to shift to Miko. Miko, you're a planner. You're looking at it from a different side. Can you talk about your role and some of the challenges you face and how you see the situation?
Well, you know, maybe for starters, I don't think actually planning is looking at it from a different perspective. I mean, all of the emerging issues that we face are just as concerning to planners on the other side of the table as well. You know, maybe some of the challenges that we face is, you know, the role of the planner is kind of like this negotiating balance, and it's kind of that negotiating balance between an economic race to the bottom versus a sort of impractical utopian everyone's sort of dream being realized. And so that's part of the balance, but we're still, I mean, we're operating within a system that we've all kind of collectively agreed to, which is this democratic process for the supply of shelter, which that might be the underlying issue, I think, as opposed to maybe some of the other quick fixes that I think often get bantered about for how to supply more housing to meet demand.
Okay, that's really interesting. And you know, one of the things I'm seeing, COVID has changed a whole bunch of things about the development industry. It's changed things for how cities have to operate too. So I want to know how the pandemic has changed your world for how developers and municipalities work together, for better, for worse. And you know, for instance, many municipal services, including land use committees, have gone virtual. To keep up with the democratic process during COVID. Is that something we would like to see continue? And are there other things that have come out of COVID that have helped move us forward in terms of our understanding of the issues? Kathy, do you want to take that one?
Sure, that'd be great. I think there are some silver linings with COVID, as you know, as terrible as it is what we're experiencing right now. The online process, and you know what, kudos to the municipalities. They've done a great job, you know, bringing forward these platforms that allow the protest or the process to carry on. Because if it were a protest, yeah, Luke's laughing at me. No, to allow the process to carry on with the applications going through, because if everything was to come to a halt, you know, we're in a housing crisis already. Just, you know, exacerbate the situation. But this online process, I really do think it gives us the best of both worlds. And I really, really, really hope that once the state of emergency is lifted and the numbers around gathering are lifted as well, that the municipalities will leave these processes in. Because for me, I think what it does is it creates more of a democratic process. It allows more people to partake in these things, in the meetings, than would have if they would have to physically come to the meeting. People have barriers to coming to these meetings, whether it's, you know, not being able to get a babysitter, or physical you know, restraints, or simply just not feeling comfortable standing up in front of a room of people and speaking. So I just think, and I know that it's really difficult going into these online platforms. People with technology just don't understand it. So it's an educational piece, and we just need to help those who need the help to be able to use these things. But I really do think, I think it's just such a great way to expand the ability for more people to have input.
That's
I
great.
don't mean to shake things up too early, but we've used the word democratic 3 times now. There's nothing democratic about this process. Imagine we held the provincial election and we said only those that within 100 meters of your particular representative can vote them in. And you can only show up to the ballot box at, you know, 7 to 9 p.m. on a Monday or Thursday night. Like, there's nothing, this process isn't democratic. This process is favor to those that already have a vested financial interest or who have home security. And so it does not contemplate the needs of future residents or those that would like to move from one area of town to another. Instead, we've kind of created these walls around, if you arrive before a certain date, then you're able to participate in the approvals process. but neighborhoods and cities were not built by immaculate conception. Everybody's home at one day or another was an impact on somebody else. And so we need to think about approvals across the city or individual approvals at a city level. How does this individual project meet the needs of a growing region instead of just this one street, instead of, the street, block, or neighborhood?
So you're saying we have to expand our vision and our understanding beyond our own blocks, beyond our own little area plans. Is that correct?
Yeah, because when you go to a meeting and say you're building a 4-story rental building that has some affordable housing, you'll hear a resident say, well, I don't want this building to shade my backyard, so can they go somewhere else? So they're posturing a negative outcome to housing being built next to them, which it could be. Shading is undesirable. But at the same time, they're asking for it to go somewhere else, which means they're willing to have that problem deferred to someone else's backyard. And naming like these, providing like, vernacular, what these groups are called is not helpful. But like new housing costs something for sure on an impact to a neighborhood or a block level. But we've never asked ourselves once, what is the cost to society if we don't build this housing here? And it ends up going somewhere else to an area that we have to build new infrastructure or new transit or new schools all to support. That is way more expensive on society, like a burden on society. It's the disconnection of services and infrastructure is way more expensive than shading some tomato plants in the backyard. So we really need to start thinking about what is our regional need for housing and how do we deliver that in walkable, transit-connected areas.
Mm-hmm. But it is interesting. Oh, yeah, I was just going to ask you, Miko, can you respond?
Well, what's interesting about this is that the whole, a lot of people see this concept of community consultation sort of coming from the 60s era, revolutionary sort of Jane Jacobs, era.
Robert Moses.
Response to Robert Moses, response to these big city builders. But interestingly, the entire concept of community consultation actually came from the demand from developers, and it was in order to protect investment, and it was to be able to sell potential land purchasers security. And so the security that they were selling was that nothing is going to change in your neighborhood. So it comes with these covenants on title. So don't worry about anything ever changing. Once you buy here, nothing will change. And that was sort of the concept of covenant on title, which is what the entire community consultation process is based on. And it's about protecting land rights. And so just to Luke's point, it absolutely prioritizes one group over another group. That is what our system of consultation is based on. So that's problematic from the outset to have it to be about protecting land rights to individual owners when we've sort of changed the concept of what community consultation should be about to be more about how do we actually act or respond to growth for the collective good, for the common good, which isn't what the system is designed to do.
Is there any, let me ask you this. Are you aware of any jurisdictions, cities in other countries or elsewhere who are actually doing it in a more kind of, I guess, inclusive way and moving the process into the future? Are you aware of any other cities? I'm aware of other cities that have actually kind of done it from a less inclusive way to achieve the same ends, where they have just sort of any consultation is out of the question, and it's a very top-down approach. And so, we kind of go in these swings of democratic approaches, but I've yet to see that I'm aware of anyway. There are online platforms which try to be more inclusive, that try to open it up to a wider group than who is traditionally served by consultation. But I think every municipality is struggling with the community involvement process. Okay, well, Kathy, let me ask you, I mean, you're coming from the Urban Development Institute, and you guys are seeing trends, you're seeing entire movements happening. Have you seen anything that could serve as a positive example for where we could possibly go in terms of consultation and becoming truly more democratic?
That's the magic answer, right? Like somebody needs to have that crystal ball or the magic wand or whatever. I personally have not have not seen anything or heard of anything that is done differently. But like Miko said, there are jurisdictions now that just simply, they know what housing is needed and they just do it.
Right. You know, Luke, how about you? I should ask you because you started this.
Yeah, my apologies. Well, I mean, like, you know, Edmonton. So essentially in Victoria, we have, you know, if you'll join me on a very brief numbers tour, you know, 67% of our land base is zoned for single family housing only. And there's another way of saying that, because that sounds like, oh, that sounds like a wonderful little suburb of cul-de-sacs. Another way of saying that is we have an apartment ban on 67% of our land base. And when 60% of Victoria is renters and 86% live in multifamily housing, we're essentially saying 25,000 people are banned from living on 67% of our land base. That doesn't sound very equitable, if you ask me, or very fair. So other jurisdictions are just getting rid of their exclusive single family zoning rights. And, you know, like Edmonton has gotten rid of their single family zoning and their parking. Do we really want to be out innovated by Edmonton, Alberta? Is that like, you know, like Minnesota, or you know, is another example of allowing more housing per lot by right. Seattle, Portland, there's lots of jurisdictions that are moving away from these kind of exclusive property rights and looking at multifamily housing solutions as key to climate and the housing crisis.
Okay, very interesting. Well, I want to ask, I'm going to start with Kathy and Luke. And I think developing empathy for each other's issues is one way we come up with solutions. So what are some of the things, and I'd like you guys to kind of frame this, try and frame it in a positive way if you can. What are some of the things you wish that people understood, or that you wish municipal councils and municipal politicians understood about working with developers? What are some areas of pain that you think are constantly misunderstood?
Luke, go for it.
There's probably two key areas. The first is, I think there's a huge misunderstanding behind development finance. We often get asked, developer, why can't you just make less money? And, you know, there's an opportunity cost to capital, and banks control the strings. They control, you know, you have to make a certain return on costs or else you don't get your loan, and then the housing doesn't get built. So it's not just about a developer saying, oh yeah, I'll just make less money because I'm feeling good about myself today. There's a bank that ultimately holds the strings on the loan. The second thing that I hear the most is the free market hasn't provided the housing that we need. We do not have a free market in the housing sector. We have a highly regulated, supply constrained system of housing. If you look at the car sector, no one is complaining about a shortage of used cars because manufacturers can build as many cars as they like in any given quarter of their product development. Imagine I came to you and I said, you know, let's make a coffee shop together. And we get told where the coffee shop can be, what the coffee shop looks like, where we can get our beans from, how much we can charge for our beans, and who we can sell our beans to. Nobody in their right mind would ever open a coffee shop, but yet that is our housing market. So I think it'd be really helpful to really maybe stand for a second and ask ourselves from a municipal standpoint is what are the outcomes that we're after, and then how do we get out of the way?
Do you think there's a cliche that's emerged about the developer? Maybe it came out of the 80s, I'm thinking, or somewhere when developers did drive around town in limousines. There were a few, but is there a cliche that just persists?
Yes.
Because a lot of developers I know are just pretty ordinary people, doing trying to do pretty big projects.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of urban myths about development, and it really would be nice to get those myths out there and demystify them. And I completely agree with Luke, what he was saying about just not you know, developers being told that they're leaving money on the table and things like that. And it's just not true. And like Luke said, it's completely connected to the banking system. I'm going to make a little bit of a plug for UDI because I actually have a course coming up at the end of October. It's a new course that we've developed, and it's going to be a performa series. And it would be great to see the staff and council attend this course. And basically what it does is it takes you through, you know, purchasing your land and then building your projects, and from start to finish. And it's just a way, education is key to having people understand what is really happening. And I think that's what the problem is here. A lot of council just don't understand what goes on behind the scenes when you're doing a development. So this course will help.
Okay.
Can we
And
just be honest with ourselves for a second? Like, just like any industry, there are good developers and bad developers. You often go to a coffee shop and get a bad coffee, and then you say, that was a bad barista, give me bad customer service. The difference with a bad developer is you might have someone building an ugly building for 2 years next to your house, and it's just the scale of disruption to your life might be just much more, and so it lingers longer. But you know, I think, you know, the system isn't necessarily designed though to reward the good developers. It's kind of designed to, you know, frustrate everybody equally to some degree.
interesting. Well, I'm going to, Miko, I haven't forgotten about you there. And, you know, I would like to ask you, what are some things you wish people understood about the role of city planning departments and how things happen? Because you have a lot on your plate too.
Yeah, yeah, it seems like I've got about everything on my plate at the moment. But what, you know, I think, I mean, there's still a debate out there from I mean, there's a couple sides of this debate, obviously. And one of those debates is, should the government, in quotes, be involved in the regulation of land at all? And so, you know, should there even be municipal planners, is at one side of the extreme. And the other side of the extreme is that planners should actually be the ones providing the housing. And, you know, some municipalities are trying to do this, like when the housing provider, shelter is being provided from a government perspective. And so in between those two extremes, there's the poor planner trying to balance out all of these competing desires. But I mean, there seems to be a sentiment that the best thing a planner can do is kind of get out of the way. But I actually happen to believe that planning offers some value, and some of that value is some stability, some security, some insurance that, you know, the provision of the built environment happens in an orderly sort of way that serves the community to realize livability and sustainability objectives. So I think there is a value in that. And I think that's probably, you know, the only thing that I would say, that, you know, maybe that the value that planning brings to the development profession is actually recognized. And maybe the other side of that is, gosh, my phone is ringing, sorry.
Okay.
The other side of that is just this idea that that planners are there to actually help realize the community objectives. And that means actually doing things and not doing things. And that's a bit of a hard one as well, because I think often communities want things not to change, and that's not our role. And I mean, it depends on what community you're in, but you know, in Victoria right now, there is a little bit of ambition.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand, you know, there have been some improvements over time in how development permits go through. The process is speeded up. Are you finding now with COVID it's slowed down again, or?
From my perspective, I feel like this is, you know, just as busy as ever. There seems to be, there's a shift in terms of what kind of developments we're seeing, but I think a lot of developers are playing the long game, and, you know, most applications take 2-3 years before they're actually realized. And so hopefully in that time frame, the pandemic will no longer be such an issue.
Right. Well, I want to, because I recognize that we are on a bit of a timeline here, I want to move on, and I want to look at what needs to change at a municipal level to allow developers and municipalities to work together more efficiently. And it doesn't, let's try and come up with 3 positive solutions that we can put forward from this call. If the 3 of you can agree on it, all the better. So Kathy, let me start with you.
Oof, that's a loaded question.
It is. You get your wish list right here.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, feeling for Miko, I understand how planners are kind of caught in the middle. It would be really nice to see some more staff delegation when it comes to different approvals, development permit, variances, and things like that. The developers are sorry, the planners are the people that have all the knowledge. They've gone to school, they've got degrees, so more delegation to staff, allow them to have a little bit more say in what goes on. And hiring more staff, I think, would be great for the municipalities. I see that these poor planners are taxed to the nth degree. So breaking down some of the silos in the municipalities, in the departments, like from department to department. I think it would be really nice to see some more collaboration between the departments.
Give an example of that, Kathy.
So there, when you're doing a project, there's all sorts of different departments that are involved. You've got zoning, you've got planning, you've got permits, you've got tree bylaws and parks and so on. And all of these people need to come together and have meetings at the very beginning, look at the project as a whole and find out what pieces don't fit together at the very beginning, so that it's not going back and forth. Mm-hmm. Clarity on what some of these projects are needed for, like we talk about affordable housing right now. We need affordable housing, but there's all these other policies that add layer upon layer of cost to it. And you've got like heritage fighting against affordability, or density fighting against tree preservation. So there's got to be more clarity for the developers going in about what it is that is going to be acceptable through council.
Right. So, okay, that's great. And Luke, can I ask you, what are some positive directions we can move in that will make a difference?
I think mandatory process and timelines of application would be an easy place to start. And if the municipality doesn't have enough staff to do so, then you should offer a fast track program where essentially the applicant can pay for a third party review of their application. Another aspect would be to do away with rezonings and public hearings. If an application meets the intent of an official community plan, then it should just go straight to a staff delegated approval. Official community plans are the goals and aspirations and vision of a city done through far more extensive consultation. The city of Victoria's last OCP, I think it was 8,000 residents were consulted, versus a typical running application, you might hear from 5 to 10 people, and that's just, is that the same level of consultation? No. So delegate to the goals and aspirations of the OCP as their guiding document for development approvals. Another aspect would be the provincial government should set some municipal targets for individual municipalities providing a certain set amount of housing. So we have a regional housing stock, but for example, Oak Bay does not contribute that much diverse housing to the region. So should municipalities that are bearing the brunt of growth, like the West Shore or Victoria, receive compensation from other municipalities that don't? So if you're supposed to provide 1,000 units of housing per year and you're only providing 700, is there a provincial tax on the difference that then gets given to the municipalities that for parks and playgrounds and infrastructure for the fact that they are providing housing? So it indirectly, it would incentivize the creation of housing to be seen as this community benefit, which way when it should be.
Interesting. Okay, and I'm going to ask Miko, from your point of view, what are some things you see moving in a positive direction that could be done?
Well, yeah, what are some things in a positive direction? I do think, there are, if anything, that the pandemic has taught us is that, looking at things slightly differently can help to illuminate, some pluses and some pros and cons. And I think some of the, there's an expedited process to managing a consultation online. But even at that, the idea of delegating to staff, I think that works well in some instances, but I think sort of like the rules of engagement require the wider community consultation. And often it's, to Luke's point, the rules of engagement are the OCP. And so if things are consistent with an OCP, then it should be just approved as of right. I think we could sort of fine tune that a little bit to really talk about performance measures. What is impact, what isn't impact, what is form and character, what isn't form and character, and just really talk about some performance measures. And if that can be agreed on, fantastic. The OCP kind of does that, but it's a little bit less. It's a very sort of mother statement kind of document. It'd be nice to kind of get down to the nitty gritty of it. And if the community can really be involved in that process for agreeing on what those ground rules are and then have it delegated to staff, I think that would be a far more expedited way of, addressing the challenges that we face.
Okay. And I'm just kind of curious here. One of the suggestions that came out of the Rising Economy Task Force committees where I work at, South Island Prosperity, was the idea that new development should be able to provide economic impact statements as part of rezoning and or development permit applications. Proponents of this say this will provide councils and community members with a better idea of the direct and indirect economic benefits to municipalities and the public associated with new development and construction. I'll ask all three of you. What about the idea of that?
I have some comments on that. So there are sort of rules within the Local Government Act that what we're dealing with here, when we're dealing with new housing and development, we're dealing with land use decisions. And so land use decisions aren't supposed to be made on the basis of improvements to the tax base or what those economic outcomes might be. Land use decisions are meant to be based around like a rational planning principles, things like what uses are appropriate next to one another, what uses aren't appropriate, what will the impact be to infrastructure, to transportation, to the supply of housing. And those are meant to be the rational outcomes for a land use decision sort of analyses. So just maybe play devil's advocate a little bit here. If it's always about the economic outcomes, we kind of get into that trap again of that race to the bottom. Well, if we build this building 400 stories, then we're going to have such an enormous tax base. And it's like, well, to what end? And so there's got to be that balance in that conversation, I think. So I think that can be potentially problematic. And I sort of would subscribe to the ideas of sort of first principles planning to make those land decisions.
Okay, very interesting. Kathy, do you have a comment on that?
Sure. Yeah. And I think where this comment or idea came from was the fact that, the developers are always told that they're leaving money on the table and they're making so much money. And so I think why this comment came up or suggestion was to take that guessing game away and for the developer to, show a pro forma and to show that, no, you know what, we're not making millions and millions and billions of dollars. Yeah, and because I was on that task force, and I think that's where it came from, just to kind of demystify that.
Luke? Oh,
maybe,
sorry, go ahead, Miko.
I'm going to interrupt Luke, but just before, there's also, I think, a huge benefit to like Kathy was saying, have an understanding of what the ramifications are of development and what pro formas actually look like and what margins actually need to be. I've heard from councils previously where, councils are looking for community amenity contributions that capture increases in land value from the 1980s So, because, and I'll see if I can sort of articulate this well, but, there's this perception out there that people have land banked or developers have land banked, and they've land banked for 20 years and now they're going to develop. And so the lift in land value should be based on all of the, economic gain from those 20 years. And that just speaks to a very strong misunderstanding of the process for what's going on. And so, yeah, I would sort of definitely think that there needs to be a more transparent education process for how development actually works. And I mean, I would say the same for what are the outcomes and objectives of planning in terms of lifting up that community dialogue around it.
Does dialogue take place? Have there been attempts to bring planners together with developers, kind of in a conversations? I don't know what happens in your world. I'm just the homeowner here. So is this something that actually happens?
Well,
if a planner and a developer are in the same place, they spontaneously combust outside of the office. So it's
in the time of our meeting, I've had 4 different developers phone me, and planners and architects in just the time of this meeting. And so it's like, I'm always in dialogue, but I'm not sure if it, is benefiting anyone.
And of course, oh, actually, sorry, Luke, do you want to comment on the idea of developers providing economic impact statements? Do you have anything to add on that?
I think it's potentially predicated on a loose argument, because I think it's predicated that economic development is good. And I think you'll find some people that would say, though, the earth is a finite resource, so we can't just have economic development forever. So I think it needs to be more specific than that. But on the flip side of that, Victoria's growth, like upwards of 80% of all housing built in Victoria dating back to the 60s, has come from employment lands. So we've taken lands that were generating economic utility, either by providing manufacturing, industrial, or other job bases, and cannibalizing it for housing, instead of going to areas where low density housing existed and increasing the density of those areas. And that is a quantifiable impact. So I mean, we can look at GDP on a per acre basis. Okay. And when we quantify the number of acres in Victoria that we've essentially taken out of the employment base and put into multifamily housing, there's probably a loss. I think quantified it was a $600 million loss per year that we've walked away from in terms of GDP per acre. So, those low density neighborhoods are not providing anywhere near that. They're probably in the magnitude of $40 or $50 million a year economic development. So there's a huge discrepancy on our land use planning. And so to Miko's point about land use conflicts being top-down planning or principles first planning approaches, I do think that a top 3 urban planning principle is a healthy city. And a healthy city means having employment lands within your borders, so that people aren't having to drive to their office all the time, or to their manufacturing hub, or whatever it might be.
Right. Okay, very good points. And so we're coming to our last couple minutes. I want to ask you all if you have brief closing statements, just some last thoughts you'd like to get across. Kathy, I'll start with you.
Oh, last thoughts.
Or ongoing.
Well, I am hopeful that from COVID, we will see some silver linings come out of it. For the longest time, we've been, it's a battle, and it would be really nice to have some new systems, some change in the process that will work for both sides, and to get the housing that we need, because, we do need it. Off the top of my head, incentives is one thing that we haven't talked about, and it would be really nice for the development community to have carrots instead of sticks. So, for municipalities to give the developers some incentives to get the housing built that needs to be built, especially when you're talking about rental. Rental economically is a little bit tougher to make the numbers work. Yeah, I think that's the only one thing that didn't come up in the conversation were the incentives. So.
Okay, great. Miko, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah. Do I want to weigh in? Last thoughts. Well, yeah, I'll sort of agree with Kathy's comment. It's good to see some of the silver linings that come out of change, whether or not it was welcomed or not from our COVID pandemic experience. And I think there are a number of silver linings, and one of those just being really demonstrating how quickly we can change when collectively we're faced with a challenge. We can actually very quickly address that challenge. And I think, if there's anything that I sort of learned through this process, I knew at the City of Victoria for almost a decade, we've been trying to go paperless. Well, we did it in 2 weeks after the pandemic hit. And so I think that those sort of things where, we're actually quite capable when we act collectively. And I think, I know it's a myth to think that there is actually like a community vision, like a collective vision. There's a community full of very many different visions, but I think it's kind of recognizing that and seeing how we can maybe act all collectively to realize all of the different visions would be my sort of takeaway.
Okay. Luke, anything you'd like to add?
I'm going to quote Evan Siddall, who is the head of CMHC at the federal level, and he said, we need to stop taxing density, and gentle densification isn't enough. If we want affordable housing, it's a good place to start, but intense and even aggressive densification is necessary. And I don't mean to say that as we just need to bulldoze and build. That's not it. I don't think we've truly understood the hurt and the scale of the problem and the harm that it's doing to current and future residents, just how desperate people are. So for providing what is viewed as a basic human need, being shelter. So I think we need to have empathy, which I think is critical. But at the same time, we really need to start thinking about who is being housed instead of the housing itself, because the problems in getting housing built, we just get so focused on what does the built form look like and not who's going to occupy it, and spend a lifetime of memories potentially in a place. So let's be empathetic to our future residents, equal to those that are here now.
Very good point. And I want to thank you, Kathy from UDI, Luke from Arise, and Nico from the City of Victoria. I think this has been a really interesting conversation. And I think we managed to come up with some really interesting points. It'll be interesting to see where it goes as our region grows and struggles and changes and continues to argue, but hopefully argues less in the future about housing, which is a basic human need. Thank you so much. We're going to go to a Q&A now with the audience. I want to thank you all for being here today and being so open and thoughtful with your comments. Thanks very much. Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi there.
Time for Q&A. And I believe there's a number of different questions here and comments. So I'm going to go through the questions first, and then I will roll back and go through the comments. So the first one is, how do we reconcile the environmental impact of increasing housing and the impact that has on natural systems and the need for housing outside of densification? Hang on, I'm going to stop us here for a second. Okay, we're going to start that part over. So again, I will get back to the comments in here and I will take us through the questions first. So the first question is, how do we reconcile the environmental impact of increasing housing and the impact that has on the natural systems and the need for housing outside of densification? Luke, do you want to take that one? How do you reconcile that?
Well, I mean, that might be the most important question of the entire day. And what it does is it flips the argument on its head a little bit, because we start asking ourselves, what is the cost if we do not densify? Because, you know, what we find where we've already built infrastructure systems, where our footprint on the ground is already, you know, prevalent, is in, you know, existing neighborhoods. So densifying neighborhoods that are established, that are compact, walkable, connected to transit and amenities, is potentially, it's two birds with one stone. It's solving, you know, energy efficiency and walkable forms on new housing types. Then also it's reducing car dependency, which is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. But what we find is, you know, when we're densifying, we're fighting over cutting down 2 or 3 trees, when, you know, in areas that are more conducive to suburban sprawl, we're cutting down 1,000 for a low dense subdivision. So urban infill densification is the urban strategy that we have
Okay.
to protect green spaces, essentially.
There's other sides to that as well, though. And I mean, and I think that the impetus of the question is coming around. There's a lot of sort of negativity towards density. I like to say, you know, efficient land use or compact development. But there's the whole other side of this as well. I mean, maybe like everything kind of points, like the not affecting the environmental systems means just don't tear them up. And so there's, you know, spaces at a premium, but you know, you can look at growth boundaries, or you can look at conservation areas as well, and those all point toward densification as well. But even just reducing the reliance on private automobile travel, increasing urban forest initiatives is a really good way to go about it as well, where we just sort of rewilding urban spaces, or you know, daylighting rivers. These are all sort of ways to you know, planning mechanisms to sort of not affect the environmental systems as much as you would otherwise. But I think, you know, to Luke's point, it is very much premised on efficient land use and all the benefits that come with that.
Okay, great. Kathy, do you have anything to add to that?
Not really. I think one of the things, I just think that this our whole COVID situation is going to be interesting when it kind of all shakes out, and finding that maybe just making these little urban villages a little bit more dense as well, and that will have people rely on vehicles less, because I really do think you know, a lot of people are still working from home, and I think that's going to be the case for everything going forward. So just densifying these little urban villages that we have, taking, like Luke has talked about in our panel discussion about, you know, the single family neighborhoods that need to have more density on them. So I just think these, yeah, going forward, I think it's just going to happen because of what's happening with COVID.
Okay, great. The next question relates to tiny house communities, and I'm not, I don't think any of you are tiny house experts that I know of. However, I'm going to ask it anyway in case you want to weigh in. Our question is, I think one of the solutions to the housing crisis is to embrace tiny home communities, yet municipalities seem very resistant to them. Is it a revenue issue? They won't generate the same amount of property taxes, question mark. Miko, do you want to?
Sure. I mean, the city of Victoria has had some tiny house applications, and admittedly, there is some resistance to it. But a lot of it doesn't have to do with a tax base or anything like that. It has more to do with efficient land use, really. And so instead of, you know, using maybe 2 single family lots for 10 tiny homes, you can just as efficiently use 2 single family lots for 20 apartments. And I think that's the question, where what we end up with in a tiny home scenario within a more urban setting is there's a lot more challenges around utility connections, legal mechanisms to deal with the tiny house parcels, you know, and even just how that actually fits within the neighborhood context, as opposed to when you can actually just use a condo or a row house or a small apartment and achieve higher, more efficient land uses and still maintain backyards and front yards and these sort of things. So I think it's been, but I have seen examples of other instances where you can still kind of have that single family home or realize that single family home dream in a much smaller version around those sort of compact tiny home. I think there's a cottage, something called compact cottages or something that's quite popular in Washington right now, where it sort of serves that market, but it's typically not seen in the more urban setting, and which would really be the neighborhoods around Victoria.
Okay, great. Do either of you, Luke or Kathy, have anything to add to that?
Not really.
I mean, you always got to ask the question: what is this serving? What social purpose is this serving? And it's another tool in a toolkit. Should we put all of our emphasis on it? Probably not. But is it the mobility aspect of them? Is it just the compact size and low acquisition costs that we're after? So I think understanding what the purpose of them, like what social goal or planning goal they're accomplishing, and then it kind of reverse out of that. How can we accommodate that in a more traditional, more efficient housing form? Because I'm with Miko. It's a very inefficient use of land.
I think I've heard it said that a lot of people, it's the front porch concept, the ability to come out and sit on your front porch and have a little piece of green. I don't know if that weighs in, but maybe the same thing can be achieved through other forms of housing. That, aid densification, I'm not sure. Somebody here has asked, smaller communities have decided to band together and do regional housing plans. They're asking, how do we attract developers to our region? What do we need to do to make it attractive to invest in these areas? Who wants to take that on? Anybody?
Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, with our developer hat on, what would it take? I mean, at the end of the day, it's there is a social purpose, but the bank controls you're financing on a project, so you have to be able to perform out some form of market demand analysis. So the underpinnings would be what is your in-out migration look like? What does your education look like? Like, what is the quality of life? Because you could have some towns have education as the anchor, and that's what the draw is to create the market demand for housing, or they might have great job creation. Others, towns like Smithers or Nelson, for example, it's just the pure quality of life of just an excellent small town feel, and so people want to move there for that. So I think finding what it is that's great about your town and marketing that, and then how does that relate to population growth and the need for housing would be some of the metrics that we look at immediately.
There's also the recognition that I think a lot of developers are somewhat risk adverse, and I think that plays in part with the bank lending criteria. And so in many instances, it's the history of development that is the biggest handicap to smaller communities' ability to attract different kinds of development. And so I know in instances on the island anyway, where if you were to propose something that's slightly different or substantially different from the status quo, it's actually, first of all, it takes a brave developer to do that, because they'll look at the history of what's sold in that town, and they'll never see an apartment or a townhouse ever being sold. Then they'll look at what is typical to develop and what is the typical market, and the banks will look at those sort of things as well. And so everything is kind of it's your own history that can sometimes play against you a little bit, and it takes that one brave soul to crack the mold. And at the same time, a lot of these smaller communities as well are maybe post-pandemic or current pandemic are more and more appealing as well, because there's a bit of an attractiveness to smaller communities at the moment that I think is a real thing. And of course, we're speculating, but that's my sentiment anyway.
Okay, that's really interesting. Well, I'm going to throw you an easy one, Kathy. Where can we find out more about the course that you mentioned?
Oh, well, it will be on our website. I think we're planning on marketing it and posting on our website next week.
What's your web? Can you give us
your?
Yep.
It's udicapitalregion.ca.
Okay. Which municipalities have done a good job at sustainable planning and development? That's a hard one. Asking them to maybe play favorites. Victoria, there you go.
No, what's interesting, I remember reading the stats on new home starts, and included in those new home starts were obviously condominiums and rental units as well. And there's always this sort of comparison with the Western communities where there's so many new home starts, but actually Victoria has outperformed the Western communities in terms of new home starts when you include condominiums and apartments, and it's done that without increasing its land base. And so there's this huge sort of efficiency in how that's actually been achieved. And then you pair that with the amount of network that's being currently built for alternative modes of transportation or more sustainable modes of transportation, and we start to look pretty good.
Absolutely. Well, let's flip it and do a little bit more talking about the green building certification. Our viewer is saying, what impact, if any, has green building certification had on the development process within municipalities? Maybe we can answer that from both points of view here. Nico.
What is the impact? So, I know traditionally, 5-10 years ago, there was a very strong focus on requiring developments to achieve green building certifications. And so it could be LEED, it could be some municipally developed green building certification. And that was, premised on the idea that it was like a density bonusing system where a rezoning would come in and the municipality would ask for these green building certifications to be achieved. In BC, that's changed somewhat. And a lot of that negotiation has sort of happened up front where we've moved to the step code. And so and municipalities opt in to what level of step code they want to go with. And typically the planner side of it isn't asking for anything beyond what the municipality has adopted for step code. But and also building code, like year after year, building code is getting more and more sustainable. And so what was a LEED gold 10 years ago is standard building code now. And so I think we've really upped the game in terms of the sustainable building practices. And as far as I can tell from a municipal perspective, there's no slowing down to the amount of applications. Everyone's full tilt in terms of new applications. So.
Okay, great. Luke, do you have anything to add on that?
I would comment that what's not sustainable is how long it takes to build housing. I think some of these green building initiatives were used as levers to maybe fast track applications, but then as like Miko mentioned, step code came in and it kind of diluted these other certifications where, we used to do build green standard, build green gold or silver or platinum, whatever. It's almost ubiquitous now with step code. So it's not really super relevant, but we on the marketing side of things, we have not seen a buyer preference trend towards high performance buildings. I think some would say that buyers are willing to pay 5, 10, 15% premium. That has not been our experience to date. So we've typically just trended with the code with a dabble here and there on some high performance building, but it's as a standard practice, it's not pursuing. Our philosophy, developing compact walkable neighborhoods is far more sustainable for the planet than a high performance building.
Okay. Kathy?
And I think too, we need to bring into the conversation the elephant in the room and the cost of it, right? And we're looking for affordable housing right now, and so you really have to weigh all those factors, the affordability and with the green and whatever it is, density and so on. So it's just a challenge adding that to the pile of other costs that go on to development.
Okay, great. Well, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to all our questions. However, there is going to be a deeper conversation taking place at 4:30. And so please join our roundtable if you'd like to participate. I would like to thank all of our panelists, Kathy Witcher, Luke Mari, Miko Batanzo. And I also want to thank our session sponsor, Vancouver Island Real Estate Board. And each panelist will be receiving a gift from St. Jean's Cannery and Smokehouse. And I can tell you, these are good. Are coveted. So thank you everybody for joining us. Please join us at the roundtable at 4:30.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.